All right, here we go. Lecture number 2. This one's on the 15th century new monarchs, which are at the end of chapter 12. The new monarchs still fall under the Renaissance. And so what's going on in Italy is the city-states and the Renaissance, like we've talked about, and the cultural rebirth. But outside of Europe, it's still the Renaissance era, so it's still the same time period, but they're not having a Renaissance. And so if you're looking at your timeline, this would go under the political piece of the timeline, which is the new monarchs outside of Europe. So what's a new monarch? We've talked about a new monarch, or we've talked about the countries in Europe being much less unified countries, and people don't identify themselves as being French. They identify themselves as being Burgundian or part of the Navarre. Well, that maybe is Spanish at this point. Anyway, but they're identifying with their local lord. They're not identifying with their united countries. So during the Renaissance time, people start to identify themselves with their countries. And the new monarchs are those kings who are successful at trying to unify or create some more stabilized central government. And they're not as successful as later absolute monarchs or later monarchs, but they're the first step in actually having a country to rule, having a system of taxation, having a strong army. And so those are really the characteristics of the new monarchs. The first and most important one is that they have created power, or they've gotten power over the nobles. So in order to get power over the country, you have to take it away from the people who have it currently, which at this point in most all of Europe is the nobles. Also need an effective method of taxation, a strong, loyal army, and a national army. When they fought the 100 Years' War, the 100 Years' War was fought with noble armies. So volunteers, nobles had to give their knights and their armies to fight. In this age, they'll start standing armies and local national armies that belong to a king. Also religious unity, but religious unity was less important. It was more trying to take the power away from the church than it was important to be united at this point. Starting in 1517 with the Reformation, religious unity will be more important. All right, so who were these new monarchs? There's 3 successful countries that have these new monarchs. The first one being France. The Valois dynasty, started by Louis XI, X is 10, the 11th, the Spider King of France. He was successful at uniting the French regions into one France and also extending the borders. So if you see, I don't know if you can see my mouse move here on the screen, but the Low Countries were controlled by a guy named Charles the Bold. Well, Charles the Bold is killed in battle in 1477, and Louis is able to kind of manipulate his way into taking this for France, significantly enlarging the French kingdom. And at this point, land is power. So he gets a lot more power from taking this Low Countries from dead Charles the Bold. Burgundy, before Charles died, wanted to incorporate France, and after he dies, France incorporates Burgundy. Okay, or the diminishing the power of the nobility and strengthening the economy. He's able to level a tithe, which is an annual tax that will help with the recovery for the crown after the 100 Years' War. And they do actually have a pretty strong recovery. People will give Louis the Spider King, Spider because he was sneaky and manipulative. I don't know that spiders are sneaky and manipulative, but he evidently thought so. So the Spider King really laid the foundation for a strong French monarchy. People still didn't give him complete loyalty. He still had trouble collecting that tax, but creating a large army, the largest army in Europe at the time, really helped him force the issue and get control. As a result of Louis the Spider's reign as a new monarch, he is able to extend his territory to include that Charles the Bold's land of Burgundy, secure the foundation for taxes, have the largest army, but they were still not as strong as they would have liked, because as you see on the map here, this green area is the Habsburg land. The Habsburgs will be the ruling family in the Holy Roman Empire. They will also rule Spain. So France is going to continue, as the Habsburgs control more of the Holy Roman Empire. They're going to continue to be in this Habsburg sandwich, which makes them their army necessary for one, and makes them constantly under threat of takeover by the strong Habsburg dynasty. All right, so Louis the Spider extends the power, takes the power of the nobility or diminishes their power, and levies a strong tax, or that annual tax, the tithe. in England, we're going to have the start of our Tudor dynasty. So the Tudors will include people like Henry VIII, the guy with all the wives, and Elizabeth. Some of you know Elizabeth I or have heard of her before. The Henry VII is the father of that dynasty. So he will win the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses is named because it's the House of Lancaster. So just like in France, there's the different houses which are more powerful because of the lords than the nation as a whole. So Lancaster, the House of Lancaster, fought the House of York in the English Civil War, broke out in 1450s. Lancaster was the Red Rose, York was the White Rose, and so it's called the War of the Roses. The War of the Roses will end when Henry Tudor, who was from the House of Lancaster, will win, defeating the Yorks, Richard III, and he'll start the Tudor dynasty. He will bring England back with great recovery from that 100 Years' War, but certainly England was not as disadvantaged as France in the war because the war was fought on French soil. He will also build up a navy, not a standing army like France and Spain, just a navy, which will serve them very well as we get into the Age of Expansion. He'll use trusted nobles to raise his army, and it will work just fine. He'll limit the power of the nobility and use this Court of Star Chamber. The Court of Star Chamber is one of those identifiable terms that you just need to know and you need to remember. It'll be asked as a multiple choice question on lots of AP exams. Just one of those funny things. It was named because it was a court chamber that had stars on the ceiling. It had stars on the door, and so they called it this Court of Star Chamber. The way that Henry VII used it was he used it to limit the power of his nobles. If you were a strong noble that was threatening Henry's power or didn't have complete loyalty, he would bring you up on some fake charges, coerce you into confessing, bring you into the Court of Star Chamber, and he would sentence you to prison or to big fines or something that would get your loyalty. So it was really a fake court. It was a fake court used to manipulate and force the nobility into loyalty with Henry. The Court of Star Chamber is its name. Make sure you remember it. And so Court of Star Chamber, he limits the power of the nobles. He's able to unify and gain land by winning the War of the Roses, and able to build up his navy, which will help him continue and maintain control of his dynasty. All right, so the last successful new monarchs, or leaders that were successful at centralizing their power, would be Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. This is their marriage portrait on the right. It's like the poster for arranged marriages as opposed to marrying for love. Those two do not look very happy or in love. So this will be the beginning of the rise of the Habsburgs in Spain. There'll be Habsburgs from the Holy Roman Empire, as I said earlier, and Habsburgs from Spain, or that will rule Spain. This is what Spain looks like. It's the Kingdom of Castile, the Kingdom of Aragon, and then you've got Granada in the south, which is primarily Muslim, and then Navarre in the north, which had been controlled a bit by France, and then it had been independent. It will go back to France in future centuries. Spain and Portugal today is referred to as the Iberian Peninsula. You'll want to remember Iberian Peninsula and know that that's Spain and Portugal as we go forward. This is what they did in order to unify their kingdom. So they were married, and in order to get power from their nobles, they tried to limit the power of the landed aristocracy. So those nobles with land, they had this royal council which helped govern. They replaced all the members of the royal council who were landed nobles with middle class lawyers, merchants that were very loyal to the throne, because that's how they didn't get anything without Ferdinand and Isabella. They were able to create a professional royal army. It was the best army in Europe. It wasn't the biggest, but definitely they were the best. They were the strongest by 1500. Religious unity was key in Spain. Not so much in England and France. Religious unity was key in Spain. They launched their own Inquisition, which is, it was okayed by the Pope, but it was run by Ferdinand and Isabella. They wanted to drive all Jews and Muslims from Spain. To be Spanish was to be Catholic. The Catholic Church is still very strong in Spain. In 1492, they issued an order that expelled the Jews. An estimated 150 to 200,000 Jews fled, and others were allowed to convert to Christianity. The Inquisition in Spain was all about trying to figure out if the Jews that had converted, called the new conversos or the new converts, if they were still practicing Judaism behind closed doors. So people would turn in their neighbors, people that they worked with, really anyone, and the inquisitors would show up at their house to try and determine if they were still practicing Judaism. And it was really, if you were called in, you were probably going to be tortured until you either confessed and then you were killed, or you were tortured to death if you really truly converted to Christianity. So if the inquisitors showed up at your house, it was like a death sentence. All right, so provided stable groundwork for the Spanish exploration in the Americas, as they had a good, strong tax base. Isabella is the one who sent Columbus in 1492. They also, 1502, Isabella expelled all the Muslims. So I forgot that in the part above. So the Reconquista of Spain is to make Spain Catholic, expelling the Muslims, expelling the Jews, or having the Jews be converts to the Catholic Church. All right, the unification was final in 1512 when Ferdinand conquered Navarre. The individual kingdoms of Aragon and Castile remain day-to-day business-wise, remain the same, but they did unite army, this religious policy, and their policy of restructuring the noble council. All right, I'm almost done because my ninth graders are coming back from lunch. But quickly, failure at centralizing power. The Habsburgs, the German princes were too strong to give the power to Maximilian I. In Eastern Europe, it plagues still today that just the large number of ethnic groups prevented any kind of unity. Poland, actually probably the strongest point in Polish history, was right here during the Renaissance time, but the aristocracy still was more powerful than any sort of Polish king, which in the future, as Russia rises, will become problematic for the Polish. And the last thing is quickly about Russia. The most important piece is down there on the bottom where it says Muscovy. Muscovy is basically just the state that Russia starts to build on, coming out of the... Can you hear my ninth graders tugging on the door handle? Oh my, breathing. The Muscovy is the land that Russia starts to take back from the Mongols. So the Mongols controlled what is modern day Russia right up until 1500s. And so at the turn of the century, then they start to build on Muscovy, and it will expand and expand into the empire we know today as Russia. So future-wise, Muscovy, it's Moscow, and how it starts and expands. All right, we will review a little bit on Monday about the new monarchs, but otherwise, that's it for today, and there I am under 15 minutes again. Thanks, guys.